Atlas Creamery. Now, this is where you try to steal a copy of the picture. Okay, Oscar, fly killer. Eureka, Creamery.
Thank you.
Quite a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, there sure is.
Yeah, makes me want to buy a few cows and settle down. Land O'Lakes pins. Atlas. So is this all Atlas then?
Yep. Yeah.
And what's this one? Eureka.
I found one of them for my dad.
Oh, there
Isn't that whole bunch, yeah.
By the way, it's Russ Hansen.
Oh, Charlie Grunland.
Grunland.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're over in that is that the ground?
I'm hollering. Holler louder. Anyway, so at this time, I'm going to let Betty Jensen take over, and they have a lot of these displayed here as several others. And she's going to introduce the speakers. We have a program committee, and they have congregated the people who are going to there now, I feel who are going to speak tonight. Yeah, I have mentioned it so you can send that around. So, Betty Jensen will introduce all the speakers and tell you a little bit more about what they're doing.
Good evening, everyone, and we're going to learn a little bit about creameries in the area tonight, their history and their function in the community. With us is Sylvan Erickson from Luck, the brother of Stanley Erickson, who's the buttermaker here in Cushing at the end, and also a nephew of Heartland and Clarence Jensen, who were buttermakers. Bob Birch is here, but he's back someplace else. He was here. Okay. Okay, Bob. And Karrie Swenson is here from Melin.
Yeah.
Oh, and then back here Marvin, and his father used to have the Taylor's Falls Creamery, and he worked in that.
My dad was a milk truck for them, and I wrote a lot of the titles.
Okay. When the settlers first came to this area in about the 1850s, there were several necessary businesses that were needed. Stores, blacksmith shops, and creameries. Before the creamery started, the milk was separated at home, and the butter was made at home and sold to individual neighbors or to the stores. The advent of the creamery, the milk was still, for the most part, separated at home. They all had one of these little gadgets. And then the cream went to the creamery. I don't know if any of you remember, but I sure do, the hog slop barrel that had all the skim milk poured into it and then the pig feed put in along with it to feed the pigs. The first creamery of record in Eureka was in Scrubtown. And this is the picture of the Scrubtown Creamery. It was located 1 mile east down through Spooky Hollow and half a mile south of Eureka Center. It was started and owned by Nelson C. Jensen and a Reverend Maxon about in 1895. Nelson C. Jensen was the father of Russell Jensen. They paid 10 cents a pound for butter fat. The farmers brought their whole milk in one day and took their skim milk home the next day. Later, they also ground some feed for the farmers in the evening. Nelson Jensen decided it was best for the community. He would close his creamery in 1915 and sold his equipment to the Eureka Co-op Creamery after their first building burned, and then they were building the new building. After closing the creamery, he and Pete Matson started a sawmill in the creamery location. Margot, do you want to start your butter now? Okay. Oh, you aren't quite ready. Okay. I'll get you later. The Eureka Co-op Creamery was organized in 1905. The farmers loaned the organization money to start at 7% interest until it was paid off. The interest rate was kind of high at that time. But compared to the wages, Sam Smith was paid 50 cents a day to superintend the building of the creamery. And Al Anderson worked for board and room until the creamery was up and running. And then he ran the creamery for 1 month for $45. This was a wood frame building, and the farmers unloaded their milk on one side of the building, drove around and picked up their skim milk on the other side where it was already separated. Okay, Sherman. The house for the butter maker was built at the same time. Whoops, went the wrong way.
Oh, is that?
Push the bottom one. No, push that other one way. No, this is no.
Broken, no.
That's the house for the butter maker, and that's still standing in Eureka. Although it's been moved twice. Well, last time in the mid-40s when 87 was widened, they had to move the house to the east. The building burned in 1915 and was replaced by the cement block building, okay, Sherman, in the same place. That's the building they built in 1915. John Matson, okay. John Matson was the first butter maker in the new building. Yeah. Okay. Sherman? Behind the creamery was an ice house. You can see it back there behind the creamery with the 2x4s on the outside. And that's also John Matson standing on the your right end. The ice house was filled each winter with ice mostly cut from Tea Lake, which is a half mile north of town. And any of you wonder where Tea Lake was, it's where Gordy Gibson lived. There were many butter makers over the years. Hartland Jensen was there in 1928 when he was also the justice of the peace. You know that? No, I don't know. During this time, farmers took turns hauling the cream to the creamery. Then several men hauled in pickup trucks, and Howard Beestrom was one of them. In 1928, Howard Hewlett bought a 1-ton Ford truck for $650. Oh, man. Can we get to that kind of thing?
No.
This was the first cream truck for the creamery. He borrowed half the money from Bob Lumsden and half from Hartland Jensen. He paid Bob by hauling firewood to town for the people that had bought firewood from him. Why don't you click that once more? This is the inside of the Eureka Creamery at that time. That would be the churn over on that side.
The cream.
Crane? Okay. You know more than I do. You know something else? What else can you tell about it?
We got a line shaft up above and run by a steam engine out the back. Or later on an electric motor, big electric motor.
Now, they had a steam boiler in there, I think. Okay. On January 31st, 1930, burglars, there was never any clues were found. And Bill Campbell met a big car going east that night and thought it might be the thief.
But Bill never told us where we come from.
Yeah, Bill wouldn't talk about that part.
No?
Benny Johnson came in 1941. At that time, they were making casein at the creamery. The old ice house had been remodeled to house the equipment for the casein. And this ended in the mid-40s, or the late 40s. Also about this time, they changed from the wood-burning boiler to the oil-fed boiler. The wood was cut by various farmers and piled between the creamery and the Baptist parsonage, where Carl McCurdy's house sits today. There was humor and fun in the creameries often. You had a good time, didn't you? Sylvan? After the change of boilers, Benny made a skating rink where the wood pile had been piled. And one day when Alfred Peterson was visiting Benny, the churn handle caught his clothes and flipped him up around the churn, set him back down on the floor, unhurt but pretty shaken up. I don't think he got close to that handle again. In 1953, the creamery removed the casein equipment and installed roller dryers to dry their skim milk. These were soon outdated with the coming of spray dryers. The drying ended about 1957. There was one young man who Benny had taught how to make butter. And when Benny left, he stayed on until the new butter maker fired him for making butter better than he did, than the butter maker did. In 1954, there were 5 can trucks hauling milk to the creamery, besides the farmers bringing in their own milk. Oh, there's Benny Johnson. I forgot about that.
There's Benny, you betcha.
And that was when they just bought a new scale, wasn't it?
Yep. The second one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Benny Johnson isn't on that picture, but I can see.
So it's probably the same time that he got the bigger washer.
Okay, you want to flip it once more, Dennis Sherman? No, too quick. Flip it once more. There were 5 can trucks hauling in at this time, besides the farmers. There was Bill Jensen, Donnie Blunt, Vernon Card, Howard Jackson, and Sherman Jensen. This picture is one of the truckers unloading their cans. Gene Olson came in 1955. When the drying ended in about 1957, Gene made cheese for a couple of years. When the price of cheese was high, then the price dropped down, so they quit as it was not very profitable. When Gene moved on to another job, Harry Camplett came for 1 month, and he died of a heart attack. Bob Birch run the creamery while they hunted up a new guy. Herb Geisler came and stayed for a year or so, and then Bob Birch took over as butter maker and manager until they merged with Mid-America Dairy in 1966 and were just a holding station until 1967 when it closed completely. Bob, do you have anything to add?
No.
No? Does anybody else have anything to add? Any questions? How about you, Sylvan?
Nope.
Nope.
You would put the butter in there, and you take that square stopper, and we stomp
Here,
it
what
out.
he's talking about.
And you would put this in the cooler overnight. Then the butter was firm but not frozen. And you would put this wire contraption over the top, tighten her down here, jack it up until you had about pound thickness above. Take the cutter and kind of draw it across at a little bit of an angle. Cut them off, and then you'd start wrapping. And a couple good wrappers could wrap out a box in about 15 minutes or less. That would be 90 pounds. I think my dad went to work when he was about 9 because his mother had died and he had to go out and work to help support the family. And I think, I don't remember for sure, but I think he talked about working for our Beckmar. So that was a little while ago. And the reason I'm getting into this is because I'm related to all these characters that she's been talking about. And I'm probably the most sober, composed person you will ever see. But it's pretty wild. My Uncle Hartland, especially, he, you asked if we had fun in the creamery. We sure did. This was before my time, but my dad went off to Bone Lake Creamery and started working there. As near as I can figure it out, probably around 1912, 1914. And then this lady came to the creamery with her father, and he said, "Oh, you sure got nice mittens on there." And she was about 18, I believe, and he must have been about 22. And so it got to be kind of a habit. He kept coming. And her name was Loretta Jensen. She had 3 brothers, Arthur, Clarence, Hartman, and 2 sisters, Mabel and Ann. Now, Ann ended up marrying Howard Hewlett. Mabel went off to the cities and later moved to Texas. But my dad took Clarence and Hartman in and taught them butter making trade. Can you hear me out there? Okay, let's move this table closer to them. See, they sit there and I try to tell by their faces if they're hearing me or not. And some of them, Max, I can tell he tips his head a little bit when he can't. Let's move the table closer.
That'll move Max closer.
Yeah, why don't you move Max up a little bit? Yeah, but I need I need you looking because that's the only way I know if the crowd is getting what I'm saying. Come up one more seat. Well, anyhow, I'll tell you about Hartman first because how many of you were farmers at one time? How many of you knew Hartman Jensen? He was loved by the farmers. He used to go out with Kruger buying cattle. This has nothing to do with the creamery, but it's history. One time they were up in the Barrens, and they were behind a John Deere H pulling a load of hay. Kruger turned to Hartman and said, "Take a match, get out and burn that thing up so we can get by." Hartman jumped out of the car, ran up, just acting. And he really did set it on fire. He burnt that sucker up, including the tractor, and the farmer got paid pretty well. Another time they could do anything, Kruger and Hartman, especially if they had a couple little shots, to give them the courage. And they told the farmer that they would butcher his bull for him. Well, he said, "We'll put him in the garage." New garage there, and You butcher them. All you'd have to do is get them killed and bleed them. Howard, Kruger and Hartman went in the garage. They had a little discussion about who was going to hit the bull. You know, you hit them right there, and they're stunned and they lay down. You cut the throat. Well, they argued about it, and I don't know really who hit the bull. I think it was Kruger. But Hartman and Kruger both ended up in the rafters of the new garage. The bull was going around in the garage. So, and Hartman was also a very strong man. He was powerful. And farmers, the one thing they always complained about was their test. Now, I was on the other side, so I don't know, the butter maker couldn't do anything with the test. He tested all the same way, but their test wasn't high enough. And this one fellow came in, and Hartman had just about had it. And he came in, and he started complaining, and Hartman picked him up by the two arms and put him against the wall. He said, "You just shut up." And he did. Yeah, and that works sometimes. One time I was working in the creamery, and my dad had gotten the mumps, so I was doing 2 helpers' jobs, and I had a helper. Well, I was dumping milk, and a guy came in and wanted some numbers put on his cans, and another fellow drove up to the window and rattled his cans in there, and I was trying to get the guy out. From before, you take the steam hose, heat up the can, rub the number off with a steel wool, paint it on, and I was pretty fast at it. And this guy came in and says, "What in the," and then there's a 4-letter word he used, "are you doing? Can't you see I want my milk dumped?" And I said, "You see this brush?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, if you want this shoved up your," keep talking. And you know, he quit talking. But Hartman Jensen also, he worked at the Bone Lake Creamery. Now I heard this from my mother. They had a fellow by the name of Melin. He stuttered, you know, and there were some chickens running around in front of the creamery. And Mel took a nap afternoon. He was laying down. Hartman had some Limburger cheese. And Mel was breathing deep. Hartman took the Limburger cheese and smeared it right under his nose. And then he waited. Pretty soon, Mel was sniffing. And all of a sudden, he opened his eyes. He saw those chickens. And there stood Hartman. That's just exactly what Hartman wanted him to see. He thought it was the chicken manure. And he came off of his sleeping place like a dog. And this happened pretty regular. Hartman would do something and Mel would end up chasing him. He could never catch him. But he would try. And Hartman, well, he was really loved by everybody. He went to SELHS, and then he'd casually lift somebody's hand. He'd be talking to him. And they'd be bidding the auctioneer. He'd, "Yep, yep, I didn't buy that." You had your hand up. He just had a knack for doing things like that. Now, Clarence, his brother, he worked in Eureka, but he had worked for my father also. And that house that was shown, I stayed down in that house several times because his son, Clarence N. Jensen, was about 4 years younger than I was, and we got together. Remember, there was a heck of a big cornfield up by the store going north of it. Do any of you remember that cornfield? Well, he used to go to school, and I'd go wait for him and meet him, come home. But Clarence was a different kind of guy. He was a much more sober fellow. And I think about the time you went into the drying system over there, he probably moved from Eureka down to, not Chisago, Schaefer, yeah. He went to Schaefer. And that's where he finished up his butter making career. Butter making was a lot of fun. And this creamery hill, right here, she said that the creameries were the centers of the community, and they were. There was a store right across the street from this creamery. And as a child, that's where I grew up. And at that time, the maples that were in the yard seemed like really big maples. The store was right across the yard. A lot of things happened on that hill. One time it was a kind of a political thing. I'm not going to use any names because there might be some of them still living. Incidentally, I never thought that I lived long enough to be history. But anyhow, they had an argument up on the hill, and my mother could look out the south window and see that hill. She could see that voices were getting higher. She couldn't hear it, but she could see it. And finally, it seemed like it settled down, and the one turned around. He was a short man, started walking down the hill. The one behind picked up a big rock, walked up behind him, and my mother said, "I thought he killed him." Because he just crumpled up and there he lay. But they were tough. They were really tough. Times had been hard, and they got tough. The guy got over it, and I think they died good friends. He didn't die next week. It was farther off than that. Yeah, you should have asked that. But anyhow, on that hill, she talked about the burglary in Eureka. That was a pretty common occurrence too, because Bone Lake Creamery, my mother, we had just adopted Shirley Erickson, my cousin, and my mother was up giving her a bottle in the middle of the night. She looked at the creamery and saw nothing. The next morning, the butter was gone. So it wasn't that far away where the thieves were. But that hill was quite a thing too. We had a young fellow, his name was Russell Lowerson. He was a race car driver. And he also was a farmer. But he had just about as much fun in him as Hartman. There was another fellow named Edward Lynn. He had a, I remember what kind of a car it was, but he brought 2 cans of milk to the creamery every day. And he'd come just purring along and up the hill. Well, this Russell came along, and Ed was wasting his time, he thought, so he just kind of came up behind, picked him up on the bumper of his car, went around the end of the creamery and took him right back out onto the highway. And I remember seeing that, and that was the funniest thing you'd ever seen. The fellow, there he was going. But going back to my father, the Bone Lake Creamery originally was owned by a Tom York. And I think my dad was born in about 1896. And he went to work. I think Tom was still running it privately. And as near as I can figure out, the farmers paid some money for a piece of land in 1910. And I don't know quite what the span was before my father got into the creamery and started working. But he trained a lot of good butter makers. And this picture, if you want to look at it later on, is a picture of the District 20, I believe it was District 20, butter makers. And I guess the creamery closed in 1973. There was a lot of water under the bridge by that time. I went off to the service, and when I left, my father moved to Luck and ran the Luck Creamery. And I had worked for him probably 2 years, and then I was drafted. And so then he went to Dresser Junction and worked in Dresser for about 3 years, that was all. Then I came back to the service. He went back and took the job at the Bone Lake Creamery again. And that's where he finished out his life. So I look at these things and I think, gosh, you know, that's history. But you know, those same people that were working with that stuff were once young like us. It didn't register. Let's try it again.
You're going to be in trouble. They're not the same between the next two creamers.
She isn't doing her part.
I'm not doing my part.
No. We're going to have to get a different street. So thank you very much for having me come out here. I appreciate it.
Margot, are you ready?
I'll give the narrative. Margot's going to make a demonstration of making butter. We milked the cows early tonight, skimmed the cream off quick so that we could get out here in time to show how to make butter. They're talking about working in the... They're walking in... You can... Well, they're talking about working in the creamery. That was the easy part of the whole dairy production stuff. The farmers had it really hard. They did all the work and everything. And the milk haulers did a lot of work. At the creamery, the cans went on rollers and flowed their way in, and people didn't hardly have to, right? Well, anyway. Of course, I didn't work in a creamery, so I'm not sure that
You know, we wore overalls, bib overalls.
Uh-huh.
And those things were so wet from sweat that they hung down,
Yeah.
and we had to shorten the suspenders during the day.
I knew there was some taste in that butter. I was wondering about.
That's overrun.
Okay, well,
That's where the profit comes in.
Yeah.
You see, they call that overrun. You get your butter going, you know, and then you take a sample out, and you wait, and you want it to be about 18.5% moisture. That's the overrun. That's the profit.
Mm-hmm.
And if a little drips off of your bibs,
you need to put salt in anyway, right? Anyway, what she's got is my grandma's, great-grandma's, or maybe it's my grandma's daisy churn. My grandmother worked, and grandfather and mother worked in the Wolf Creek store, and they made butter for the community for a few years when they were in the store. And this is one of the churns they used, and Grandpa would milk the cows and then bring it. They'd always let the milk, or they had a separator like that to separate it out. Anyway, eventually you got some cream. And they tended to make sometimes sour cream butter and sometimes sweet cream butter. Margot is starting from a Land O'Lakes carton of sweet cream butter, what, a pint, a quart? A pint, and just dumped it into the churn, and then it just cranked for, what, 15, 20 minutes? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so they're going to crank back there, and if they look like they're getting tired and you want to try it, just walk back and offer to help, and then the program will go on. Every year at the county fair, they have a butter competition for people making butter, and if you want to know the secret to winning at the Polk County Fair, my brother Byron used to win, and now his daughter or sons win it, and they said, you buy cream that's just about expired or maybe expired because it gives it a little stronger taste, and these old guys that judge down at the fair like that sour cream butter taste. So, so anyway, that's...
You know what I thought you were going to say? If you want to win down there, I'm one of the judges. You can give me 5 right after.
Oh, I meant those younger guys that judge.
Well, in the creameries, they had a tendency once in a while these days to stuff the steam hose into the churn and keep them out of cream up.
Did?
I know.
You know, we're not
A cream is the one
The Cushing Creamery was organized in 1878 as the Cushing Creamery Company. Capital stock was $3,500, consisting of 140 shares, $25 each. The actual signing of the articles of incorporation. That's the wrong one.
There.
There's, so that's part of the creamery. That's looking down the hill from the east, towards the east. In 1924, the name was changed to Cushing Cooperative Creamery Association. The first buttermaker in Cushing was a woman from Denmark. In 1925, the Cushing Cooperative Creamery Association joined the Minnesota Creamery Association to better market their products. During this time, though, the creamery was getting their water from Jesse Nick on top of the hill. Well, the creamery is down over there, and they're up over here on the hillside is where Jesse Nick lives. They pipe the water down there. There was a large tank in the attic, and I think Mark just found that tank is still in the attic of the old creamery, where the water was pumped down to, and then it was stored and used as it was needed. And the wastewater was discharged into McKean Lake to the east.
That's why so many bullheads.
That was why there were so many bullheads. When the creamery quit, the bullheads quit.
We haven't had any Iowa people since.
No. I don't have a record of when they drilled the well, and I don't have a record when they built this building, but I know it was before 1930 because I do have one of the contracts they signed with Jesse Nick in 1930 when they were still getting well from the water from him. And I don't know what happened to the first building, and anybody I asked had no idea what it was, where it happened to it. Cushing also had a house for the buttermaker, which was all on top of the hill next to Jesse Nick. It was a big square one up there anyway. It was in the early 1940s that most creameries began taking whole milk and selling the skim milk to the cheese factories. In the 1930s, the Creamery Association started the co-op store in the old Methodist church. Okay, Sherman. Oh, I didn't skip something here. Okay, yeah, they started the co-op store in the old Methodist church. Oscar Lindgren was the first manager, and there was some feed sold in the back, or otherwise the farmers went down the hill to across from the present church where they had their feed ground, and this was the feed mill owned by Karrie. Patrons of the creamery could charge their items, but the milk check didn't always cover the charges. The store moved down to the Ascot building, and I don't have a picture of that, about 1943, and then across the street to the next location where the Cushing store is now, in about 1945. They started the feed mill after the war, about 1946 or 47, when Karrie decided to quit his mill. And that's when they started the feed and grinding feed. And when the feed mill first started, the office was in the upper level of the building. In 1951, the Cushing Co-op Creamery joined Land O'Lakes. At last, it was just a holding plant for the Wanderers cheese and closed in 1980 when Wanderers brought all their stock and paid off the shareholders. Hartland Jensen, who we was talking about, was one of the buttermakers in Cushing, and Sylvan Erickson was the last one there. The last years, there was no buttermaker, there were just workers to take in the milk. Can anyone help me out with any of the questions I have?
There was a lead over the buttermaker after family for a while. I can't think of his first name.
Okay. But they didn't have any there for the last couple of years, did they?
No, they had Andy Elmer and Vernon Noah were just milking away to one buttermaker.
Yeah, Don Anderson worked there for a while too, before they quit. And they finally quit in 1980. When, that's when Betty Larson told me to quit. Does anybody else have any comments?
Did you ever figure out how they got that water down? Did they dig the...
I don't know how the water was piped down to the creamery. It must have been underground somehow or
Does anyone remember the poem that you're supposed to say while you're churning? It's like, come, butter, come, butter, come, and I can't remember the rest of it.
I've heard of it, but I don't remember what it is either. I didn't get any of the information from the Atlas Creamery, or very little, because I thought I was going to let
Shouldn't you have that guy in there a little while for in between?
Got any more you want to say?
I'm a little slower at thinking than I was.
Oh, okay. Maybe after a while we'll talk some more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I should have had that.
Okay.
When did you move to this area?
51 years, 2 months ago.
Missed 3 days.
In case you wanted to know, I grew up in the area of Old Lake where Sylvan grew up, and I knew his family back years ago. I never got any information on the Atlas Creamery. I thought I'd let the Atlas expert, Karrie, Swenson, take care of that. So we will turn it over to her now.
Pictures, there are some pictures back there on that. And when we were trying to get ready for the 100th anniversary, I went back to all of the original books, secretary's books, from the time the creamery got started. And so I don't have those with me right now because actually I could use some help from anybody. They're starting to really fall apart and disintegrate. If anybody has any ideas on how we could preserve them or save them, I would appreciate that. But I do have the original book back there from 1896 when they first started receiving the cream, and it's got the first patrons' names in there and everything in that book, and some other secretary's books from like the 20s are back there. What I'm going to read from is the historical presentation at the 50th anniversary celebration of the creamery, and also a little bit from the 75th, and then what I compiled for the 100th. Now, as I start, this was written by P. John Jensen, who was the secretary of the Atlas Co-op Creamery for, I believe, well over 40-some years. And this came from his daughter, Signy Swenson Linden. It starts out, as we open the pages of history and take a look back 50 years, as this was written for the 50th anniversary, to the years 1895 and 96, we realize that many changes have been taking place during the years that have elapsed. We are told that previous to the building of the Atlas Creamery 50 years ago, the farmers of this community, as well as of the other communities where there were no creameries, they would gather the milk in crocks and other utensils and let it stand until the cream would all settle to the top, and then they would skim off the cream and churn it into butter in a hand-operated churn as we're doing back there. Or perhaps they only had a whisk made from small birch branches with which to work the cream. After the butter had been made, they would bring what they would not use themselves to the Swerstrom store, which was in Atlas, and trade it for other necessities of life that they needed. This was a tedious chore, and taking care of the milk was a hard way of realizing any income from the milk financially. And so in the year 1895, the farmers of the Atlas community commenced to talk about joining together in a corporation with the idea of building a creamery and to equip it with machinery where they could bring their milk to have it separated and the cream made into butter. We are told that the question of where to build the proposed creamery was an interesting topic for discussion until the site donated by Ellie Swerstrom is located on the north shore of Long Trade Lake in Atlas. And I don't have all the nice pictures that Betty had, but I have a picture now where the present Atlas store is standing right now, the Atlas General Store. That was the first creamery, and that was built in 1895. So, and that land was donated by Swerstrom. And is their house the store, or was it?
No, actually, their first store was in Alabama.
Okay,
But he had the land in Atlas,
and then donated that.
and he donated the land in Atlas, which took the Alabama community to Atlas.
Okay, because I have
And then he built the store in Atlas.
a little bit about that in this, in the 75th, which I think was Elder Ethelyn had put this together.
So he actually had a store in Alabama first,
Okay,
and then
he
donated land, and
this
then,
land in Atlas, right on the North Shore.
and I think it had to do with water from the lake too.
Okay,
And they had used ice.
and they, between 1895 And now, when he came back and spoke at their 50th anniversary, Mr. Olson worked in Atlas for, I can see how many years. H.P. Olson was there, and that was in 1895. Mr. Olson also went on to remind them that the founders of the Atlas Creamery Company, in their haste to get into operation, forgot to cut ice for the creamery. So this meant that Mr. Olson had to churn his butter at night and cover the butter with damp grass to keep it cool when it was hauled 20 miles to Grantsford. So that was one of the interesting things from when it first started. Okay, there were 80 patrons that first year, and the board of directors were this much. The first articles of organization of the Atlas Creamery Company, they were signed on May 6, 1896 by Oldie Masson, G.W. Peterson, J.T. Addington, J.R. Murphy, C.N. Grunland, and O.N. Grunland. The witnesses to the signatures were Elsie Backmark and Charles Early. The milk then was separated, and the skim milk and the buttermilk was returned to the patrons. And later on, farm-separated cream was also received at the creamery. The first annual meeting was held at the Ellie Swenson store, and the total cost was $2,124.93. The first board of directors of the Atlas Co-op or the Atlas Creamery was at that time Melin and J.P. Melin, Andrew Grover, and J.T. Addington were the directors. In 1898, April, a special meeting of the shareholders was held, and it was decided that they would take turns hauling butter to Grantsford for the shipment. Anyone not taking his turn hauling the butter was going to be fined $10. In January of 1900, the membership decided to hire someone to haul the butter to Grantsford for them. And they also decided that all of the stockholders should help put up ice for the creamery. And going through the minutes, there was also lots of time how they would hire people to cut wood that they needed. You know, they were putting it out on bids, so many cords of wood for X number of dollars. In December of 1902, the board decided to build a shed on the west end of the creamery, and I think that is shown in the picture. This is kind of your first version of a milk inspector. January 25th, 1904, the membership voted to hire someone to visit the patrons and see how their barns were kept. In August of 1907, the board voted to ship all of the butter that was made at Atlas to Drost and Snyder Company in Newark, New Jersey. In 1912, at a board meeting, it was decided to move the buttermilk tank over the receiving tank and have the buttermaker, who at that time was Karrie Backmark, weigh out the buttermilk. This would eliminate the problems caused by some patrons taking home too much buttermilk. And that's written in all of these accounts here. That was obviously the problem. The people at the end of the line wouldn't get any buttermilk because the first ones would be taking too much. And so they had several different ways. Some, they were fining each other if they were taking too much buttermilk, and this is what they eventually came up with. May 1919, the board decided to have the creamery painted, and they put an addition on the east side of the building and put a buttermilk tank in then. In 1920, the creamery had new bylaws drawn up, and they became incorporated under the cooperative plan. So at that time, they sold capital stock in the creamery company for $3,750, 150 shares at $25 each. And in 1920, they also joined the Wisconsin Co-op Creamery Association. In 1921, the stockholders at the annual meeting decided that the creamery company should install electric lights and buy some shares in the Pulvernet Light and Power Company. In 1921, they joined with other creameries in the area and employed a field man for the coming year. In February of 1922, they had a meeting of the stockholders, and they decided to build a house for the butter maker. A half a cent per pound of all the butter fat would be retained for the building fund. In March following of 2022, 14 stockholders petitioned for a special meeting to reconsider the stockholders' idea of building a house for the butter maker. It was decided to give up that idea and start a fund for the building of a new creamery. The 1/4 cent per pound of all butter fat would be retained for the building fund. In 1923, they joined the Minnesota Co-op Creamery Association and signed an agreement with this association, the Minnesota Co-op Creamery Association, to sell all their butter through them, and this is what later became Land Lakes. In 1924, at the annual meeting, they turned over all the surplus for that year into the building fund. And in February of 1926,
Just a minute, did you miss something in 1924?
what?
That was the year I was born.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I was too.
You were
Boy, that shows how
That
much
was,
we were.
that was. 26, they voted to build a new creamery, and the building committee were Louis Grumman, Carl Linden, John Casperson, Anton Nelson, and Leonard J. Melin. The committee was to work with the board in finding a new location and to secure the financing, the plans, and the estimates for the building. So then in April of 26, they had a special meeting, and the membership they accepted the lot chosen by the building committee, and the lot was purchased from Charlie Erickson for $200. Alfred Swerkstrom paid for the lot and donated that $200 toward the building fund. The new creamery building was to be a two-story building, 50 by 56, with face brick on all four sides. A.L. Cedarberg was the contractor for the building, and Charles Canford was the architect. The membership decided to borrow money from the patrons to help finance the new building. Carl Linden, Leonard Melin, and William Amundsen were appointed to solicit the money for the loan. In 26, the building was complete. November of 26, the building was complete, and a dedication program for the new creamery was held. John Brandt, who was the president of Land Lakes Creameries, attended and spoke to a full house at the dedication. I believe from that reading that it was held in the upper level of the creamery. So it was 2 stories. In 1927, at the annual meeting, the membership voted to fix up the upstairs of the creamery building as the living quarters for the butter makers. It was decided that the old creamery building and fixtures should be sold, and the following resolution was adopted. Be it resolved that its surrounding creameries hire men and trucks for collecting cans to be taken to their creamery. Therefore, be resolved that the board of the Atlas Creamery should have the right to do so without calling a special meeting. Now, back about, they had talked about a buttermaker's house before, and I don't know where before the creamery building that's there now, the brick one, where the buttermakers lived, because a couple of years ago someone came back to the feed mill, to the co-op, and it was Benny Lindsay's son and daughter, and they had lived there as just very small children in the 20s, and they were looking for the house. They had pictures, or the son did, he was in his 80s now, obviously, of a house that he was sitting on the front of the steps, and that's where they had lived, but I don't know where that house was in Atlas, or where the buttermaker lived before they had the upper level of the creamery stuff. In 1930, the annual meeting, the membership decided to reincorporate and with a capital stock of 10,000, and the bylaws were changed so that non-producers could also buy stock. 1930, the patrons on the truck roll wanted the cream picked up every day except Sunday. In 1931, they sold the old creamery building to Alfred Olson for $350, and the creamery also had to pay for their share of the expenses of the street lights. So there was obviously street lights in Atlas at one time. In 1933, the Farmers Holiday Association called for the closing of all creameries in the county. 1934, the Atlas Creamery was congratulated by Chris Bach from Land Lakes on their high percentage of 93 scored butter shipped. 1936, the board contributed $10 to the legislative work against oleomargarine. 1936, they also bought boxes for the cream trucks so that they would be covered. In 1936, all creameries in the area met about the possibility of establishing a central skim milk drying plant in Mutton. The creamery had agreed to ship all of its milk to that plant if it were built. 37, they received whole milk at the creamery. 36, they also joined the Wisconsin Dairy Association and supported the advertising of the butter. In 1940, Morris Peterson, who was the butter maker at that time, was commended for his efficiency in butter making. In 1940, the annual meeting, they built a feed shed and installed equipment for grinding and mixing feed. The estimated cost was $900. In 1944, the board decided to change the method of paying for milk to the broker plan, which was paid on a 100-weight of whole milk with the differential for each point in test. The present whey was based on 80% skim milk and the price per pound of butter fat. In 1946, the 50th anniversary celebration was held with what a couple of these copies back there. This was from the 50th anniversary celebration. It was held in 46. It had been delayed 1 year by the war. And also, what was an interesting note for me was when I planned the 100th anniversary celebration, I went back through all this information and found out my grandfather had planned the 50th anniversary celebration. In 1948, the Butternut Cooperative Dairy Company had been formed and joining Meltown, Frederick, and Lux. In 1952, the handling of grade A milk was discussed. They paid off their loan at the bank. In 1955, the butter maker was George Melin, who won third place at the Wisconsin State Fair for his butter that he had entered. 1956, they built on to the end of the feed store. 1957, Land O'Lakes Creameries took over the operation of the Butternut Cooperative Dairy in Lux. Is that what you worked in there? No, your dad did. Okay. Then in 1960, they built on to the north end of the feed store, and I have an article back there, or like a little sale bill telling about when the feed store opened up. In the 60s, there was the tax laws. They incorporated creameries. In 1965, they bought a bulk truck for hauling milk, and in 1966, the grade A milk was being hauled to Boyceville. They built a truck garage on the creamery in 67. By 1968, the milk from the Atlas Creamery was being shipped to Spooner. And in 1970, it was shipped to Wanderers. We mentioned it for Cushing. And then in 1971, milk from the patrons of the Atlas Creamery was hauled to the cheese plant in Burnett Dairy. The cream was returned to Atlas and made into butter. By 72, the 34 milk patrons from Atlas were to become patrons of Burnett Dairy. And Burnett Dairy continued to make butter at Atlas until 1974. And at that time, then, the creamery ceased to operate as a creamery. And the assets, or the equipment and those things were sold. And now we continue to operate as a feed mill. And there's just a little bit at the end of that about the feed mill and equipment and stuff. There are a few copies of this back there. I think I have about 20 or so made. It does list, I have a list of all the butter and freight haulers, all of the cream and milk haulers that have hauled for the last 100 years. There's also a list of all the directors and a list of all the butter makers and the managers of the feed store. There's also a copy of these two pieces of information, like I say, this is what the historical presentation that was done at the 50th anniversary, and this is also one that was done at the 75th. And this, like I say, for some reason, I think it was Elder Esplin, she had a lot of information in here about Stephen Babcock, who developed the Babcock test for milk fat, and also Professor Theophilus Levi Hacker, who also had a lot to do with creameries and butter making in the Midwest. So there's some copies of these if you would like to read those, and there are copies of this one that hits the history of Atlas if anybody would like to take it. All right. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sure I bored you all to tears. So.
Backing up a little bit, what was the question you asked me about the Butternut Dairy?
Well, they joined, that's who your father worked for, it was Buckley Meltown.
No, he worked, that's new history.
Okay.
We're way back in ancient history.
Okay. Yeah, this was in the 40s.
Yeah. No. He didn't work for Butternut Dairy. He retired from Butternut Dairy.
Okay, well, Butternut Dairy is what come together and then became that land of dry plant. It's located along the south end of Main Street where, yes, and that was all the land of plant, and that started as a Butternut Dairy.
Thank you very much, Karrie. Does anybody have any questions about any of this tonight? Mark is going to show us how to keep separated apart. You got anything more you want to say?
Well,
You must have heard another scenario. I never heard one of them.
Mark, you can start on it.
there was always a lot of things going on around that creamery hill and that store. How many of you remember when the gypsies used to come through? I remember, I couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and my mother had given me a nickel, and I could go across the street to the store and get some nigger babies. You couldn't call them that now, you could call them car babies or something like that. But I went over there and I just loved those things. I got my little bag and I came out on the steps and I was starting down the road, and here come 3 big cars. I mean, big cars. They had 20 wheels on them at least. And gypsies always drove cars like that. And my mother came running out of the house and she yelled, "Run, Sylvan, run!" And I can remember running around the end of the fence and into the yard. And then she ran from there out to the creamery. "Oh, honey, get in here, you got to get rid of it." And my dad went to talk to them. I don't know, told them, he said he told them to just buy their groceries and move along. Well, later in the day, the gypsies had stopped at 2 bachelors' places, just a little bit apart. Had a tiny bird and Oscar Hall. And they were both bachelors and pretty shapely chicks. I think they were pretty shapely. And they kind of got close to them anyway. And after the gypsies left, both of their wallets were gone. And they got pretty excited. And they came to my Uncle Art, who lived up on top of the hill. And they called the Polk County Sheriff. Can anybody here remember what the name of that sheriff was? He was a good sheriff. He was elected many times. Moore? He was back in about 1930. But anyhow, he went with the 2 bachelors and they knew where the gypsy camp was. And they went to the gypsy camp and I guess the sheriff was carrying a rifle. And my uncle, I wouldn't be surprised if he was carrying one too. But they went in and the sheriff said, "Do any of you people know anything about these 2 gentlemen's wallets?" No. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to walk out of this tent. And when we come back in, I want to see both wallets laying by that post right over there without anything missing." They went out, they came back, there were the 2 wallets. The sheriff said, "Okay, you can go on." And that was pretty good law, I thought. But if you see gypsies now, they're just going to want to paint your barn.
Margo, are you finished?
Yeah.
You want to tell us?
That they stopped, they just stopped at my grandparents too, and they bought the same thing. Because pictures of them, was my
Yeah, they were kidnappers and everything else. Yes. That's what we were told.
Where did they come from?
Well, originally Hungary, I believe. Not hungry, but hungry.
Hungary.
And they were just normally nomads. They didn't
Live anywhere.
No, they didn't really work. They worked enough to get something. Now most of them are lawyers.